Hi, my name is Hannah, and today we're interviewing Duane. Duane runs an international entrepreneur based in Barbados. Today he gives us his view on trends in second citizenship and residence as the curve flattens and we emerge into a post-pandemic world.
This podcast channel is about you, successful international entrepreneurs, successful expats, successful investors. Sponsored by HCJ Tax.
Hi, Duane. Good to see you. It's been such a long time. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Duane Burke. I'm from Barbados. Pleasure to see you again, Derren. It has been quite a while.
Right. Can you give us a bit of background as to what you do, and so the audience is familiar with your context, please?
Okay, well, I started my career at KPMG in Toronto in the banking and finance division. Did a few years there as well, and then I moved back. I returned to Barbados and did a stint with PricewaterhouseCoopers. From there, I went into I went in the international business sector, doing basically like offshore insurance companies. And then my position before the one I'm in now, I was interesting about that because we were in about 12 territories. It took us, we went through a franchising process, so I was part of the management team for that. So that was one of the interesting accomplishments. For the last 20 years, I've been in the construction supply sector in various forms. And the one that people may be more familiar with is that we're the dealer for Benjamin Paint in Barbados. So effectively what that means is that we have to stay abreast of current events to figure out, how to position ourselves in the market.
Okay, gotcha. That's fantastic. So your finger is on the pulse of what's going on, which is super important right now. So obviously we are in unprecedented territories, right, with what's going on. We've never had to deal with this before. So the question becomes, given your extensive business experience internationally, what do you see, and you can approach this from any angle, but what do you see awaiting us in terms of challenges, and what do you see awaiting us in terms of opportunities?
Well, certainly from our angle, we're in Barbados, so we're a small island state. So our economies are not very resilient to economic impact or external forces. So we have to be very, very aware and in scope in terms of understanding the world market. So we have to have a world vision to understand how it impacts our own individual economies. So for that, we deal with hotels, we deal with same international business sector companies. We deal with a number of different people like that, etc., to understand how the market moves. So from that vision, we have to be very, very aware of what's going on in the world marketplace.
Okay, but given your perspective, what's going on? Two things. What do you see are the big challenges going forward, and what do you see as the big opportunities?
Major challenge going forward is obviously when we're going to reopen economies. For us, it's going to be very difficult in us to say we're going to open economies here in Barbados because we're very dependent on what happens in the external market. So if we say, for example, we're going to open our tourist market and there's no planes flying, or there's no tourists flying on those planes, it doesn't make sense if we open the tourist market. So we are very and the reopening of the economies has a balancing act that we have to balance. It's really economic life versus actually people's lives and the health of people. So that's where the balancing act is coming in, and how people are trying to work through that mechanism. There's really no right or wrong on how you view and what your, how you view the whole position. So it's a worldwide query. So from our perspective here in the Caribbean, there are many facets that we can touch on. I mean, there was a very interesting discussion today by the Caribbean, and there were some very interesting suggestions made in there. One of the things that this has brought about is the whole concept of the digital transformation sector. This has opened a lot of people's vision to what the world will look like. I know the CFA Society this week had a presentation, and they used the term that this pandemic brought the world forward in that digital sector about 5 years. For me, in Barbados, or 10 to 20 years. You pick any number in there and you would have as good a chance as any is predicting it. But we have been I'd say, have been averse to change. People still like the in-person contact. They still like the whole having that whole process and being part of, even like going in supermarkets. Now you're hearing people now that they've tried the online ordering and how they don't have to drive to a supermarket. They hope they never have to see another supermarket. Now, if you ask that same person 2 years ago, they wouldn't be saying the same thing. So what has happened is the digital sector, while there were many of these fringe products being bandied about, they were lacking in proof of concept or proof of theory. So now with the pandemic in place, there's no more proof of concept, proof of theory. What's happening now, certainly in a lot of the developers that we have here in Barbados, people are basically running down their door, and every person wants to have to be involved in the digital space. That in itself presents other problems, because you simply can't just take a digital strategy and just implement it. You have to make sure it's overlaid properly and you have a proper underlying structure, because a digital strategy works in combination, works in tandem. So you're going to see a lot of people scrambling and rushing to get into what they term as the digital sphere, but the people who have been doing the groundwork and have been taking the time, you will see that, in my opinion, you'll see that those are the ones that are going to survive. The other ones who don't have the sound underlying business fundamentals will fail, because they'll think that they'll just drop this digital, what they term as digital strategy, over on top of their underlying structure, and it's all going to work. So I see that in that type of space, there is going to be room for people to be able to give guidance and structure to that type of process. So for me, one of the things going forward is you'll see a lot of, in terms of the digital information innovations going forward, and those are where I think a lot of businesses will focus, and they will come out of the antiquated, what I call brick and mortar type businesses.
Okay, so I get that. So it forces an acceleration. So it's yeah. So I see that, and I also take the point that certain economies are more vulnerable than others to external shocks, and their ability to cope with them are severely limited in some cases, and especially given it's a tourism-dependent economy, like many are, and people just aren't flying. And even when we do have the lockdown lifted, it'll take a while for air capacity to build up, especially with airlines experiencing financial difficulty right now. And then even when airlines are flying, how do these new social distancing rules impact them? So perhaps the capacity will be cut by half. A plane that would typically carry 200 people because of social distancing, maybe it's 100 people. I don't know. But the point is that I see that it will impact on people, on economies and industries that are dependent on the movement of people, whether for business or for leisure. I get that. And
Yeah, well,
go ahead.
no, what I was saying is what this pandemic has done is shown in many Caribbean countries how intertwined the tourism sector is in the entire economy. So, for example, you have restaurants that are shut down. Now, restaurants tend to have a crossover between local and visitors. But in this type of environment, the restaurants, we see that the restaurants open because they have a stronger mix of foreign, and they rely on the tourist season to make it through the rest of the year. So you will see, and then that spins off even into my business. So for example, by now we should have been doing setting up with hotels to do their renovations and refurbishments. And we don't really hear too much of what's going on in that sector right now because everyone is in a wait and see. All the capital expenditure budgets, a couple of projects that we were looking at just before they shut down, they will likely restart when we go back in, but we don't know when it will happen. So the tourism sector is very intertwined within the Caribbean economy. So if you look at it from a strictly what they represent of the total economy, it really is not representative because of these spin-offs and all what I call the tangents to the tourism sector. In regard to your question of what other things I see was going to happen, for me, I think in terms of the Caribbean moving forward, well, at least certainly in the Barbados economy. Some of the others like Guyana and Jamaica are what I call they have different economic support structures that they can leverage. For me, in the Barbados environment, I see it less of looking at revenue generating streams and more at cost containment. And by that, what I mean is looking at investment in sustainable industries like food security and energy security, because we have foreign exchange. We have to deal with foreign exchange issues here. So if we don't have the foreign exchange, we can't pay for the goods. So if we don't have the income generation coming in from the tourist sector, and we don't have the capacity to mobilize and generate that business because it's out of our control, then we have to look on the cost side. So if we look at more development in the agro processing and the farming side of of our sector, that we can then feed our people, and then also looking at the energy sector, which is developing all the solar and wind and alternative energy sources, you're not going to be paying for oil. Although, if you may have seen today, paying for oil is actually quite cheap because people are paying you to take the barrels now. So, but that's only short term. So one of foreign exchange draws is paying for oil and import of oil. So for me, I see opportunities in certainly agriculture and energy dependent type industries. And I see really more in summary, I see a focus of where we look at cost containment rather than revenue generating. Obviously, you're going to prepare the tourism sector for whenever the planes start flying, but you're going to be more focused on the cost containment side.
Okay, I hear you. And I guess the whole thing about agriculture and energy, perhaps that discussion also intersects with the perception that economic nationalism is going to continue growing. So people, just like the US put America first and Britain put Brexit and put the UK first, everyone's going to tend to look at their situation first, and if it's in their best interest to do certain things onshore that previously they would have done offshore, then they're going to have to make that pivot. And even if in the short to medium term, it means that their costs will go up, I think it's just something that they need to do for the reasons that you've stated.
Sorry.
No, you go.
No, what I'm saying is I agree with you 100% because one of the things that I was going to say in terms of the cost containment, yeah, there's a couple of trains of thought with how deep what they call the deglobalization will occur. In terms of the utopia global trade, it operated on a just-in-time type system. We've learned that in a pandemic that doesn't work because it creates shortages along the supply chain. So when the supply chain is disrupted, then that's when you have panic buying and lines and that type of thing. It's like the equivalent of having a hurricane hit you in hit an island, except that the hurricane has hit every country in the world. So whereas if you had a hurricane and you don't have access to supplies, there are other countries who can supply you. When all the countries are going through the same process and what you're going through, then you have to rely on what's within. So when people started to close borders, and we had a lot of throughout the Caribbean, where you had when the US started to export restrict their PPE and ventilators and all the other related accessories related to the medical accessories, it presented challenges across the region. So you're starting to hear now people talking about having 3D printing to make the face shields and a lot of the outer work uniform places here have mobilized to make surgical masks. So what you're going to, so in those particular areas, yes, you can see where that has moved, but then you can see it now taking another step where, for me, I think you can look towards something called micro manufacturing, which, as you said, will increase costs because you're not really looking at a cost perspective. You're looking for merely protecting yourself, that because you realize that there's a scope of nationalism that's come into place. People will quickly close their borders if something like this happens again. So we need to be able to be sustainable. So we see a lot more investment in certainly specific sectors like medical, and I see that, I think in Trinidad, they're looking at some sort of ventilator project with the UE. So you're going to see regions becoming more creative. For me, what I would like to see, because I'm a regionalist by definition, I would like to see CARICOM to move away from their insularity and understand that collectively we can grow together and that we're all one family in the CARICOM. And I would like to see where we can, within each of our territories, to protect our own, because we are one people. We're only separated by water, but we're still one people. And I would like to see where we can leverage our particular boundaries, leverage our particular resources where we can be competitive and be sustainable in the world market and the world environment as we move forward.
I mean, obviously that is the right thing, that is a sensible thing, but being creatures driven largely by emotions, we know that when times were good, the appetite for cooperation was less than helpful. And we know historically, and what we can see contemporaneously, when there is an economic or social challenge, the knee-jerk reaction is to raise walls. So it seems as if there was difficulty previously, the difficulty would be intensified now, which ironically is inversely correlated to the need for it. Because if you're saying that economic nationalism is going to increase and there are going to be periodic lockdowns, this is not the last of them. Once the disease continues to be in existence, once it spikes, the numbers spike again in terms of fatalities or admission to emergency rooms, the nations will lock down, cities will lock down again. Then that means that the disruptions will continue. And if you have a country like Barbados, which may not have the best agricultural land, for example, there's a limit to which a country like yours, which is pretty densely populated, as is Singapore, where I've been a resident for the past 7 years. It's also a densely populated island. I think Singapore and Barbados would be in the top 5 most densely populated islands in the world. and therefore food security is a challenge. Food security is a challenge, and it is perhaps impossible without regional cooperation, because you can store something that is not that doesn't go bad for a certain period of time, but then at some point you need fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, or whatever. So I say all that to agree with you and to support your point. But in the face of the trend towards greater nationalism and to some extent xenophobia, it just seems to be an even bigger challenge than previously.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, what it has done is brought an introspective to people that this is a reality. So what we have to get across to people within the CARICOM is that we are too small to be out there on our own. We have to move past this insularity, the xenophobia, the so-and-so bench, that bench, and so we need to move past that. I know that the Barbados government has been working fairly closely with trying to establish ties with Guyana and Suriname. There's no reason why, like, if we're scarce of land, Guyana and Suriname have land. There's no reason why entities from Barbados can't own land to generate food product for our country or other countries to do it, because Guyana is awash with land, so is Suriname. And I think that was part of the discussions. Likewise, if we have a strong tourist sector here and we have experience and Guyana needs that, there's no reason why we can't provide services and things in return. And the objective is to have trade going back and forth, because there's nothing stopping Guyana from coming here as an instance that may work there in Guyana that may work better here than there. So we have to move past that type of aspect. So I agree with you 100%, especially when you mention on xenophobia. Xenophobia is real in the Caribbean, whether whether a lot of people will like it or not. It does exist, and we need to just move past that. So for me, I think we need to see how we can establish ties that are strong and look to strengthen the Caribbean, so that if we have whatever disasters we have or whatever is faced in the rest of the world, we can build a wall around CARICOM and protect ourselves from the exterior world, and stop and increase our resilience to what I call extra-regional economic impacts.
Gotcha. But while again, patriotism, with the putting on the patriot hat, that's the right thing. Putting on the self-preservation, as in, I need to take care of myself, I need to take care of my family first, family first, then that creates a challenge. So then the opposite may in fact be what we see, so greater capital flight. For those people in the Caribbean who may have positioned themselves at the highest socioeconomic pegs in the ladder, and they have a plan B, they have Canadian passports, they have US passports, they have UK passports. Now they may be thinking of activating that plan B, transferring some more cash offshore, getting the home ready just in case, that sort of thing. So while people are saying the right things in public, in private, when they put their family first, they may be doing something slightly different. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you 100%. But in fact, I agree with you 10,000%. The challenge is that we have to have more and more people saying it, for people to understand that 10% of 1 million is not the same as 100% of, 10% of 100 million is not the same as 100% of 1 million. I personally would prefer 10% of 100 million and 100% of 1 million. So for me, that we have to move. I know it's utopia and it's probably unrealistic, but for me, I agree with it, because we keep saying the same thing over and over again. Hopefully it will take traction, and that's just my hope.
Mm. Okay, I gotcha. Because when I look at what we're dealing with right now, there is as you pointed out earlier, there's a decoupling or an uncoupling of the U.S. and China, largely because well, China has benefited disproportionately from being invited into the world trade system. You know, the hundreds of millions of people have been pulled out of poverty, and the infrastructure and whatever is on the back of being able to position yourself as the workshop to the world, and the Europeans and the Americans particularly buying their goods. Now there's a stage where it's hold on. I see what's happening, and I think I'm giving a little too much. And we're having issues around intellectual property and trade balances and whatever. So let's take a time out. And similarly within Europe, essentially that was Brexit. The proposition around the European Union was that there was a solidarity fund that essentially siphoned money from the wealthier economies, the more advanced economies like your Germany or your UK, and funneled them towards your Spain, your Portugal, your Greece, the pigs, as we used to call them. And the advanced economies experienced some pushback because of that. So it just seems that when you look at the global trends, and just to say it a little bit further, because of where I'm, ASEAN, which is equivalent to CARICOM in Asia, there would be less of an appetite for that sort of rebalancing. So it just seems like a tall order, and I wonder if more practical approaches would perhaps be warranted. Practical in the sense that this is rhetoric, these are ideas, these are plans that have been in play, and people have been trying since the 1960s, and they clearly don't work. So maybe we need to look at something less ambitious and therefore more practical. What are your thoughts?
I definitely agree. So there are many ways to look at that. That's a much longer discussion. I know that we have a prime minister here in Barbados who's a regionalist by nature. She's currently the head of CARICOM. One of the fundamental issues with CARICOM is I think that they switch the heads every 6 months. I think, I'm not sure, but I mean that doesn't give continuity. So that in essence is a problem. So how we develop CARICOM, we can talk about this, probably be talking about it in the next 15 years. Because as you rightly said, we did have the Federation. I think that ended in 1962. So nationalism just runs rampant. Nationalism is part of CARICOM, and it is a pipe dream of mine. In reality, I think we go back to what I was saying earlier, is that each of the economies are going to look to what I call micro manufacturing. So they'll pick certain sectors that they know they had issues with before, and they'll look to develop them internally. And what you may need is you may see more cooperation between the territories as opposed to straight outright linkages. So I see more of a move towards cooperation and keeping. What I would like to see I would like to see Barbados spending money with Jamaica, spending money with Guyana, spending money with St. Lucia, spending money with Grenada, and not spending money with people who've closed borders to you. So while I'm a globalist in nature, I'm now what you've done is now you've pulled the nationalism out of everyone. When I say you, I mean this pandemic has pulled the nationalism out of everyone, because we realize that while talking about having equal trade and moving around, you have people that when the times were tough, close the borders on you. So we now have to be very wary of when we start to deal with other territories, because we know now who, when the chips are down, they're not your friend. We may have thought they were our friend. They're not our friend. They're gonna protect their own, which is a natural instinct. Now, some people will say that's fine, that's okay, but then it's not okay if I'm the one on the damaged side at the end. So you may see some sort of pushback in that type of area. You started to touch on something which is part of our economy and a part of some of the other economies within the Caribbean, and it ties back in with the nationalism side of things. We in the Caribbean, we have a strong and vibrant international business sector, which also generates quite a bit of foreign exchange for a number of companies. And over the years, we've seen pushback through the FATCA and rules and regulations. Most people in the Caribbean know what a blacklist is, what a grey list is, what when you're not on the list, and what you have to celebrate. So from that perspective, as the tax bases in these developed economies and the OECD countries start to shrink, because obviously they're economically impacted by the pandemic as well, I think goalposts again. We had this discussion a couple of days ago, and within a day of having discussion, I saw a thing where Denmark put in a proposal where if any of the companies have, if they're registered in any other jurisdictions, they were not applicable for any tax bailout or benefits of that. And I think you'll see a lot more of that, which is also a form of nationalism, which is going to be a challenge for some of the territories within the Caribbean. Namely, if we include Bermuda, you have Cayman, BVI, Barbados, and effectively a lot of the Caribbean territories have a little segment of the international business sector in some or another. So we will start to see, so effectively the Caribbean itself is being hemmed in by the external forces in a number of ways. So you have tourism that's being impacted, and you have the international business sector impacted. So then we have to look at the other industries where we can have them going. So what it brings to light is the old adage, diversification. So when we start to look back at the revenue generating side, we have to look at new innovative industry sectors, build them out. How can we leverage other territories within the Caribbean? How can we leverage with the extra regional partners? What can we do to maximize and protect our position in the global sphere in terms of on our safety and security?
Absolutely. Yeah, I saw that debate even in the US with the cruise industry seeking federal support, yet so many of the ships and so many parts of their organizational or their corporate structure incorporated offshore, understandably, necessarily, but also perhaps as part of a tax minimization strategy. So it does seem a bit hypocritical for companies who seek to mitigate taxes by parking funds offshore to then go cap in hand to the same government they've been dodging and asking for a bailout. So yeah, I do see that. But then conversely, as it's not just the Caribbean. Obviously, the economic contraction is real, it's global. So there will be high net worth people from all over the world who are now looking to activate Plan Bs, and that may include economic citizenship options, which would benefit certain Caribbean islands who play that game. Certain high net worth individuals, especially in emerging markets, as part of the whole capital flight narrative, who want to take advantage of some of the structures that your Bermudas, your BVIs, your Caymans, that they have to offer. So it may be out on the left hand, but in from the right hand kind of thing, given what's happening. But stepping back, definitely diversification, and taking that a little bit further, we're probably looking in the Caribbean at a deflationary pressure coming in, because there's just less money circulating. So that creates deflationary pressures, which may feed into the whole social unrest perspective, because jobs will be affected, and then for those who have jobs, who are fortunate enough to have jobs, or companies that are continuing to operate in the black, they will be operating at reduced margins, salaries, wages would go down. So yeah, it's just something else to feed into the analysis. I would propose. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I recall, I think I read somewhere where I think it was 80 countries approached the IMF. At the end of the day, the IMF can only do so much. And I know when you start to run out of money and you have to feed your family, it becomes desperate. So we hope that, and that's where the balancing act that we started off came in, that you're trying to balance the economic lives versus the act from the COVID. And so I'm not advocate for either position. My thing will always err on the side of caution and the medical professionals. But at some point in time, there are going to be some unpopular decisions that will have to be made. And I certainly don't want to make that decision. I would not envy any of our policymakers within the Caribbean or the global market, because it's a hard decision that has to be made. And a friend of mine who was a doctor, the thing starts of, he starts it by saying, if you make this choice, if you're okay with this, and he listed off all the different things, and if you answer yes to that, then the discussion can start on whether to open the economy. But if you're not comfortable with I'll just read quickly here. Parents and grandparents dying off in record numbers, hospitals frozen, unable to handle routine aspects of care, simply continuing business as usual while coronaviruses, patients all die off, ignoring the young who and middle-aged will die, ignoring the welfare of healthcare. Then if you're comfortable with making a decision, then it becomes down to, well, let's start the decision on when to open the economy. I am currently not at that stage. I am not certainly at the opening economy stage yet, but we will soon have to have it, because at the end of the day, people will start running out of money, and there's only so far government can go. We don't have the ability like the other countries to print money. You can exchange money. You can print Canadian dollars, US dollars, UK dollars, and you can spend it. We can't. We can only spend Barbados dollars here. We can't buy goods. So the sustainability sector gives us that advantage, because we don't need as much forex if we can develop the markets here.
Great. So
as I said, I'm not sure. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that what you said earlier, that encapsulates it all from my perspective. It is a hard choice, and I agree. I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of the policymakers, the decision makers, who are now being forced to make a terrible, terrible, terrible choice. Yeah. On that,
I agree.
On that note, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I appreciate the insight and your experience bringing it to the table. And I'm sure those who watch or listen to this would benefit as I have. Duane, thank you very much.